The executive boardroom fell silent as Michael Harrison's phone buzzed with another emergency text from his son's caregiver. His 10-year-old boy Ben hadn't spoken a word in 6 months, not since the diving accident that changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. While Michael commanded a tech empire worth billions, he couldn't buy back his son's ability to walk, or the light that used to shine in those green eyes. That morning, as Ben stared blankly out the hospital window during his weekly therapy session, Michael felt more helpless than any corporate crisis had ever made him feel. What he didn't know was that 3 floors below in the hospital parking garage, a mechanic named Owen Walsh was about to enter their lives in the most unexpected way, carrying tools in one hand and his own 8-year-old son Lucas in the other, both of them running late for Lucas's routine checkup that would somehow intersect with a moment that would change everything. Owen Walsh wiped the grease from his hands with a worn rag as he locked up Walsh Auto Repair for the day, the small shop that had been his father's before him and now barely kept him and his son Lucas afloat. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Riverside's main street, where empty storefronts told the story of a town that prosperity had forgotten. Lucas bounced impatiently beside the rusty pickup truck, his soccer cleats clicking against the pavement as he practiced footwork moves he'd seen on television. "Dad, we're going to be late for my appointment," Lucas called out, his voice carrying that particular urgency that 8-year-olds reserved for things adults often forgot were important. Owen smiled, despite the exhaustion that seemed to live in his bones these days. Since Sarah had left them 2 years ago, claiming she needed to find herself in the big city, Owen had become both mother and father, coach and cheerleader, disciplinarian and best friend. The drive to Metro General Hospital took them through neighborhoods that showed the stark divide in Riverside. They passed the modest homes and apartment complexes where Owen and Lucas lived, then climbed the hill toward the medical district, where manicured lawns surrounded glass buildings that gleamed like monuments to progress. Lucas pressed his nose against the passenger window, counting the floors of the tallest building they'd ever seen. "Think anyone lives up there in the clouds?" Lucas asked, his breath fogging the glass. Owen chuckled, remembering when he used to dream that big before life taught him that dreams were luxuries working men couldn't afford. The hospital parking garage swallowed their truck like a concrete cavern, and Owen grabbed the appointment slip from the dashboard, while Lucas gathered his backpack and the soccer ball that went everywhere with him. They were heading toward the elevators when Owen heard it, a sound that made every parental instinct in his body go on high alert. Someone was crying, not the frustrated tears of a busy day, but the deep, broken sobs of someone whose world had collapsed. Around the corner, behind a massive concrete pillar, Owen found the source. A man in an expensive suit sat on the cold garage floor, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with each breath. Owen hesitated, the appointment slip crumpling in his palm. Lucas tugged at his sleeve, whispering that they should probably mind their own business, like Mom always used to say. But something about the man's posture, the way he seemed to have given up completely, reminded Owen of himself on those nights after Sarah left when he thought Lucas was asleep, and he allowed himself 5 minutes to fall apart in the kitchen. "Hey," Owen said gently, his voice echoing in the concrete space. "You okay there, buddy?" The man looked up, and Owen saw eyes that held the kind of pain that money couldn't heal. His face was familiar in the way that local newspaper headlines make someone recognizable, though Owen couldn't place where he'd seen it before. The man's expensive watch caught the fluorescent light as he wiped his face, clearly embarrassed to be seen in such a vulnerable state. "I'm sorry," the man said, his voice rough with emotion. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I didn't think anyone would come this way." He started to stand, brushing dust from his suit that probably cost more than Owen made in 3 months. Lucas stepped forward before Owen could stop him, offering the man his soccer ball with the innocent generosity that children possessed before the world taught them to be cautious. "My dad says sometimes when you're sad it helps to have something to squeeze," Lucas announced matter-of-factly. "This ball's pretty good for squeezing. It's got the right amount of air in it." The man stared at the offered ball, and for a moment Owen thought he might break down again. Instead, he took it carefully, as if it were made of something precious, and managed what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Thank you," he said to Lucas, then looked up at Owen. "I'm Michael Harrison." The name clicked then, and Owen realized he was talking to the CEO of Harrison Tech, the man whose face had been on the cover of Business Weekly just last month. More importantly, he was the father whose son had been in that terrible accident, the story that had dominated local news for weeks before fading into the background noise of other people's tragedies. Owen extended his hand without thinking about the grease still embedded under his fingernails or the fact that his work shirt had seen better days. "Owen Walsh, this is my boy Lucas." Michael shook his hand with genuine warmth, and Owen noticed that despite the expensive clothes and the corporate title, his grip had the calluses of someone who knew what real work felt like. "Is your son okay?" Lucas asked with the directness that made Owen proud and terrified in equal measure. Michael's face clouded over, and Owen quickly put a protective hand on Lucas's shoulder, ready to apologize for the intrusion. But Michael surprised him by kneeling down to Lucas's eye level, treating the question with the seriousness it deserved. "He's hurt," Michael said simply. "He can't walk anymore, and I think he's forgotten how to be happy. I don't know how to help him remember." Lucas considered this with the gravity of a child who had learned early that life wasn't always fair, that sometimes dads cried in kitchens when they thought no one was looking, that mothers sometimes left without saying goodbye. "Maybe he just needs a friend," Lucas suggested. "When I was sad about Mom leaving, Dad took me to meet Mrs. Chen next door, and she taught me how to grow tomatoes. Now I'm not sad all the time, just sometimes." Owen felt his chest tighten at the casual way his son referenced the worst period of both their lives, and he saw Michael's eyes widen with something that looked like recognition. They stood there in the parking garage for another few minutes, an unlikely trio connected by circumstances and the strange kindness that sometimes bloomed in unexpected places. When Owen finally mentioned their appointment, Michael insisted on walking them to the elevator, still carrying Lucas's soccer ball like it was a lifeline. As the elevator doors closed, Owen caught a glimpse of something in Michael's expression that looked remarkably like hope. 3 days after the parking garage encounter, Owen was elbow-deep in the engine of a 2008 Honda Civic when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him wipe his hands and answer anyway. Michael Harrison's voice came through the speaker, hesitant but determined, asking if Owen might be willing to take a look at his vintage Mustang that had been sitting unused in his garage since the accident. "The thing is," Michael explained, "Ben used to love working on cars with me. It was our Saturday morning tradition before everything changed. The mechanics I've called want to tow it to their shops, but I was hoping someone might come to the house instead. Maybe Ben would show some interest if he saw someone actually working on it." Owen found himself saying yes before he'd fully processed what he was agreeing to. The Harrison estate sat behind iron gates in Riverside's most exclusive neighborhood, where houses looked more like museums than homes. As Owen pulled his battered pickup through the circular driveway, he felt the weight of the class divide that separated his world from Michael's. Lucas pressed his face to the window again, this time marveling at the fountain in the center of the drive and the perfectly manicured gardens that stretched toward a house that seemed to go on forever. The garage held more cars than Owen's shop saw in a month, but his attention was immediately drawn to the covered vehicle in the center bay. When Michael pulled away the tarp, Owen whistled low under his breath. The 1967 Mustang Fastback gleamed despite months of neglect, its metallic blue paint catching the afternoon light filtering through the garage windows. "She's beautiful," Owen said, running his hand along the hood. "What seems to be the problem?" Michael explained that the engine had been running rough before Ben's accident, and since then, he hadn't had the heart to work on it. As Owen popped the hood and began his examination, he became aware of someone watching from the doorway that led into the house. Ben Harrison sat in a state-of-the-art wheelchair, his 10-year-old frame seeming even smaller against the metal and leather. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and his green eyes held a flatness that made Owen's chest ache. This was a child who had retreated so far inside himself that the world had become something that happened around him rather than to him. "Hey there," Owen said casually, not making a big show of acknowledgement. "I'm Owen. You must be Ben." The boy said nothing, but Owen caught the slight movement of his head, the barest indication that he'd heard. Lucas, who had been exploring the other cars with the reverence of someone visiting a cathedral, wandered over and plopped down on the garage floor near Ben's wheelchair. "That's a really cool chair," Lucas said matter-of-factly. "Does it go fast?" For the first time, Ben's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something that might have been amusement. Owen continued working on the engine, explaining what he was doing in terms simple enough for the boys to understand, treating Ben like any other curious kid rather than handling him with the careful delicacy that probably characterized most of his interactions these days. The carburetor needed rebuilding, Owen determined, but more than that, the car needed love and attention. Over the following weeks, what started as a simple repair job evolved into something neither Owen nor Michael had expected. Every Saturday, Owen would drive out to the estate with Lucas, and while he worked on the Mustang, the boys would sit nearby, Lucas chattering about school and soccer, while Ben listened with increasing attention. Michael would bring them lunch, and gradually these sessions stretched longer. Owen found himself looking forward to their conversations, discovering that beneath the corporate exterior was a man who genuinely loved his son and was struggling with the same fears that kept Owen awake at night, wondering if he was enough, if he was doing right by his child. The breakthrough came on a rainy Saturday in November. Owen was adjusting the timing when Ben wheeled closer, close enough that Owen could see the curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Lucas says you taught him how to change oil," Ben said quietly, his first unprompted words in months. The sound of his voice seemed to startle Michael, who had been reading nearby. "Would you like to learn?" Owen asked, keeping his tone casual despite the significance of the moment. Ben nodded, just barely, but it was enough. Owen showed him how to check fluid levels, how to read the dipstick, how to identify different engine components. Ben's questions came slowly at first, then with increasing frequency, his sharp mind eager for knowledge despite his body's limitations. Michael watched from across the garage, tears streaming down his face as he witnessed his son engaging with the world for the first time since the accident. When Owen suggested that Ben might want to help with some of the easier tasks, the boy's face transformed with something that looked remarkably like excitement. That evening, as Owen packed his tools, Michael pulled him aside. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's been like a ghost for months, and today I saw my son again." Owen understood the feeling. There had been dark days after Sarah left, when he wondered if Lucas would ever stop asking when Mommy was coming home, if either of them would learn to be happy again. The Saturdays became a fixture in all their lives. Ben began wheeling himself out to the garage as soon as he heard Owen's truck in the driveway, his face lighting up with anticipation. Lucas and Ben developed an easy friendship, the kind that transcended circumstances and saw only possibilities. They built model cars together, raced remote control vehicles around the estate grounds, and created elaborate scenarios where Ben's wheelchair became everything from a race car to a spaceship. Owen started bringing extra tools, teaching both boys basic mechanical skills and watching with pride as Ben's confidence grew with each small accomplishment. The boy had natural aptitude and an engineer's mind, asking questions that showed he was thinking several steps ahead. More importantly, he was laughing again, his joy infectious enough to transform the entire atmosphere of the Harrison household. Michael began joining their garage sessions more frequently, rolling up his sleeves and getting his hands dirty alongside Owen and the boys. It was during one of these afternoons that Owen learned about Michael's background, how he'd started Harrison Tech in his own garage 20 years earlier, how success had gradually separated him from the hands-on work he'd once loved. "I forgot what this felt like," Michael admitted one Saturday as they worked together to install a new exhaust system. "Building something with your hands, solving real problems instead of just moving money around." Owen nodded, understanding the satisfaction that came from fixing something broken, from seeing immediate results from your efforts. As winter settled over Riverside, the garage became their sanctuary, a place where titles and bank accounts mattered less than knowledge and friendship. The Mustang was running beautifully now, purring like the precision machine it had been designed to be. But more importantly, Ben was talking regularly, asking questions about everything from engine displacement to what Owen had been like when he was 10. The change in the boy was remarkable, but Owen noticed something else happening too. Michael was different, more relaxed, more present. The desperate edge that had characterized their first meeting had softened into something that looked like contentment. They had created something together in that garage, all four of them. a space where healing happened through shared purpose and quiet understanding. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, slipped under the door of Walsh Auto Repair while Owen was having his morning coffee and reviewing the day's appointments. The letterhead made his stomach drop before he even read the contents. Harrison Industries Corporate Foundation. Inside, a check made out to Lucas Walsh for $25,000, with a memo line that read, Educational Trust Fund, Future MIT Engineer. Owen stared at the check until the numbers blurred, his hands trembling as the implications sank in. MIT. The same university where Michael had earned his engineering degree, the same school he'd mentioned when talking about Ben's future, despite the boy's current limitations. The amount represented more money than Owen made in 6 months, enough to secure Lucas's college education and then some. His phone buzzed with a text from Michael asking if he'd received the foundation's letter, followed by another message explaining that several local children had been selected for educational grants, that Lucas's natural curiosity and mechanical aptitude made him an obvious choice. But Owen knew the truth. This wasn't some random charitable selection. This was Michael trying to manage his life, making decisions about his son's future without consulting him first. The rage built slowly, starting as a tight knot in his chest and spreading outward until his entire body hummed with fury. He thought about all those Saturday afternoons, all those conversations where Michael had listened with what Owen had believed was genuine interest, all those moments when he'd felt like they were becoming real friends, despite their different backgrounds. Had it all been an elaborate setup, a wealthy man's guilt project disguised as friendship? By the time Lucas got home from school, Owen had worked himself into a state of cold anger that his son immediately recognized as dangerous. "Dad, what's wrong?" Lucas asked, dropping his backpack by the door and approaching cautiously. Owen held up the check, watching his son's eyes widen at the amount. "Mr. Harrison sent this," Owen said, his voice tight with control. "He thinks he knows what's best for your future." Lucas looked confused, clearly not understanding why what seemed like good news had made his father so angry. Owen folded the check and stuffed it in his pocket, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. That evening, Owen drove out to the Harrison estate with Lucas beside him, both of them silent during the 20-minute trip. The familiar sight of the circular driveway and manicured grounds now felt different, like a movie set designed to impress rather than a place where genuine friendships had been forged. Michael met them at the front door, his expression immediately shifting when he saw Owen's face. "Owen, I was hoping we could talk about the foundation letter." Michael began, but Owen cut him off with a sharp gesture. Ben wheeled up behind his father, his face bright with anticipation for what he thought would be another normal evening of garage time and easy conversation. "Hey, Owen." "Hey, Lucas?" Ben called out, his voice carrying the enthusiasm that had become so precious to all of them over the past months. "I figured out that problem with the distributor timing we were talking about last week. Want to see what I came up with?" The boy's excitement made what Owen had to do even harder, but his pride demanded it. "We need to talk," Owen said to Michael, ignoring Ben's question. "Alone." Michael's face fell as he recognized the tone, the same cold formality that had characterized their relationship before friendship had softened the edges. He suggested they use his study, leading Owen through hallways lined with expensive art and family photographs that suddenly felt like displays of wealth rather than personal memories. The study was everything Owen had expected, all leather and mahogany and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that probably cost more than Owen's annual income. Michael closed the door and turned to face him, his expression wary but hopeful. "The educational trust is completely legitimate," he began. "The foundation has strict guidelines about recipient selection, and Lucas qualified on his own merits." "Cut the corporate garbage," Owen snapped, pulling the check from his pocket and slapping it down on Michael's desk. "We both know this isn't about merit. This is about you deciding my son needs saving, just like you decided I needed work, just like you've been managing every aspect of our relationship since day one." Michael's face paled, but he maintained eye contact, refusing to back down. "That's not fair, and you know it," Michael replied. "Yes, I recommended Lucas for the program, but only because he deserves every opportunity. You've seen his mind work, Owen. He has the potential to accomplish incredible things if he gets the right education." The reasonableness of Michael's tone only made Owen angrier, the calm logic that reduced his son to a charity case worthy of rescue. And I suppose I can't provide that education myself? Owen demanded. Is that what you think? That without your money, Lucas is doomed to be just another mechanic's kid who never amounts to anything? Michael's composure cracked slightly, his own anger beginning to show through the diplomatic facade. I never said that, Michael shot back. But you're so proud you'd rather see Lucas miss opportunities than accept help from someone who cares about him. The words hit Owen like a physical blow, the casual assumption that his pride was more important than his son's welfare. He thought about all the nights he'd lain awake worrying about college costs, about Lucas's future, about whether he was enough. You think this is about pride? Owen's voice rose despite his efforts to control it. This is about respect. This is about you treating us like your personal project instead of your friends. Did you think I was too stupid to figure it out? The convenient job offers, the foundation grant, all of it designed to make me feel like I had some dignity while you managed my entire life? Michael stood behind his desk now, his hands pressed flat against the leather surface. That's not what this is, Michael insisted. The job was real, your skills are valuable, and the foundation grant is legitimate. Just because I recommended Lucas doesn't make it charity. But Owen was beyond reason now, months of suppressed insecurity and class consciousness boiling over into something ugly and destructive. You're lying to yourself if you think this is anything but charity, Owen said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Rich man playing savior to the poor mechanic and his kid. You probably get tax breaks for it too. Michael's face went white with anger, his own composure finally snapping. You're being ridiculous, Michael said sharply. I've never treated you as anything less than an equal. If anything, you're the one who keeps bringing up money and class differences. I've been nothing but respectful of your abilities and your choices. The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth that Owen couldn't acknowledge. Respectful? Owen laughed bitterly. Respectful would have been talking to me before setting up trust funds for my son. Respectful would have been asking if I wanted your help instead of just assuming I needed it. But that would require seeing me as capable of making my own decisions, wouldn't it? Michael stepped around the desk, his own anger finally matching Owen's. And what about Ben? Michael demanded. What about what this friendship has meant to him? Are you willing to destroy that because your ego can't handle someone wanting to help your son succeed? The mention of Ben gave Owen pause for just a moment, the image of the boy's excited face when they'd arrived flashing through his mind. Don't use your son to manipulate me, Owen warned. Ben will be fine. He's got his father's money to smooth over any problems. He doesn't need us anymore now that he's talking again. The cruelty of the words surprised even Owen, but he was too far gone to take them back. Michael's face went absolutely still, a coldness settling over his features that reminded Owen of the corporate reputation that had made Harrison Tech so successful. Get out, Michael said quietly. Get out of my house. Owen had expected anger, even shouting, but the quiet dismissal cut deeper than any heated exchange could have. He turned toward the door, then stopped, one final cruelty rising to his lips. You know what the real problem is, Michael? You think money can fix everything. Your son gets hurt. Throw money at the best doctors. Poor kid needs education. Throw money at a trust fund. Guilty about having more than everyone else. Throw money at charity cases like us. But some things can't be bought, and friendship is one of them. Michael didn't respond, didn't even look at him, just stood with his back turned as Owen opened the study door. The hallway seemed longer on the way out, the family photographs now accusatory rather than welcoming. Lucas and Ben were in the living room, Lucas trying to explain something about soccer while Ben listened with rapt attention. The sight of them together, so natural and easy with each other, almost made Owen reconsider. Almost. Lucas, we're leaving, Owen announced, his voice carrying enough authority that his son didn't question the abrupt departure. Ben's face fell, confusion replacing the happiness that had lit his features just moments before. But we were going to work on the carburetor, Ben said, his voice small and hurt. You promised we'd finish it tonight. Owen's chest tightened at the disappointment in the boy's voice, but he forced himself to remain cold, professional, distant. Maybe another time, Owen said, knowing there wouldn't be another time, knowing he was about to disappoint a child who had already endured more disappointment than any 10-year-old should face. Your dad can hire someone else to finish it. The words were designed to wound, and from Ben's stricken expression they found their target. Lucas looked between Owen and Ben, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Dad, what's going on? He asked as Owen guided him toward the door. "Why are we leaving so early?" Owen didn't answer. Couldn't answer without saying things that would confuse and hurt his son even more than this abrupt departure already would. As they reached the front door, Owen heard rapid wheelchair movement behind them. Ben appeared at the end of the hallway, Michael beside him now, both of them watching the departure with expressions that made Owen feel like the worst kind of villain. "Owen, please," Ben called out, his voice breaking. "Did I do something wrong?" Owen stopped with his hand on the doorknob, the question hitting him harder than any of Michael's arguments had. He turned to see Ben's face, so much like Michael's but younger, more vulnerable, filled with the kind of confusion that came from having stability yanked away without explanation. For a moment, Owen almost relented, almost went back to explain that none of this was Ben's fault. Instead, he opened the door and stepped into the evening air, Lucas trailing behind him with backward glances toward the house where his friend sat watching them leave. As Owen started the truck, he caught a glimpse of Ben in the rearview mirror, still in the doorway, still watching, still hoping they might turn around and come back. The drive home was silent except for Lucas's occasional sniffles, his 8-year-old heart breaking for reasons he couldn't understand. Owen stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to make his knuckles white, trying not to think about the look in Ben's eyes or the way Michael's shoulders had slumped in defeat. He'd made his choice, drawn his line in the sand, chosen pride over everything else. It would be weeks before he understood the true cost of that choice, before circumstances would force him to confront whether his principles were worth more than the happiness of the people he claimed to love. The call came at 3 in the morning on a Thursday in February, jolting Owen from restless sleep with the shrill insistence that only emergency calls possessed. He fumbled for his phone in the darkness, squinting at the unfamiliar number before answering with a groggy hello. The voice on the other end was Dr. Patricia Chen from Metro General's emergency department, her words cutting through his confusion like ice water. Lucas had been in an accident. Owen's world tilted sideways as Dr. Chen explained that his son had been struck by a car while walking home from his friend Tommy's house, that he was currently in surgery, that Owen needed to come to the hospital immediately. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of frantic driving through empty streets, Owen's mind cycling between prayer and panic as he navigated the familiar route to Metro General. The emergency waiting room felt like a special kind of hell, all harsh fluorescent lights and plastic chairs that seemed designed to amplify anxiety. Dr. Chen found Owen there, her scrubs stained, and her expression carefully neutral in the way that medical professionals perfected when delivering news that could shatter families. Lucas had suffered severe trauma to his spinal cord, she explained. The surgery had been successful in stabilizing the injury, but there was significant damage to his lower vertebrae. "Will he walk again?" Owen asked, the words feeling foreign in his mouth, too big and terrible to belong to his life. Dr. Chen's pause told him everything he needed to know before she spoke the words that confirmed his worst fears. The injury was extensive, the kind that would require months of rehabilitation and might never fully heal. Lucas would likely spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Owen sank into one of those terrible plastic chairs, his hands shaking as the full weight of the diagnosis settled over him. His vibrant, soccer-playing son, who had spent 8 years running everywhere he went, would now face the same challenges as Ben Harrison. The irony was so cruel it took his breath away, the universe's twisted way of teaching him empathy through the most devastating means possible. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of hospital visits, insurance battles, and sleepless nights. Lucas's initial surgery was followed by 2 more procedures to address complications, each one draining Owen's meager savings and pushing him deeper into debt. The auto shop barely stayed afloat as Owen spent most of his time at the hospital, watching his son navigate the early stages of a reality neither of them had ever imagined. Lucas handled his new circumstances with a grace that humbled Owen daily. The boy asked practical questions about his wheelchair, worked diligently with his physical therapists, and never once complained about the pain or the limitations. But Owen could see the sadness in his son's eyes, the way Lucas would sometimes stare out the hospital window, with the same distant expression that had characterized Ben Harrison in those early months after his accident. "Dad, do you think I'll ever be able to fix cars like you?" Lucas asked one afternoon during a particularly difficult therapy session. His small hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests as he struggled to transfer from the bed independently, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort. Owen's throat tightened at the question, at the quiet hope beneath his son's determined facade. "I think you can do anything you set your mind to," Owen replied, the words feeling inadequate against the magnitude of what Lucas was facing. "We'll figure it out together, okay? Just like we always have." Lucas nodded, but Owen caught the flicker of doubt that crossed his son's face, the same uncertainty that Owen felt but tried desperately to hide. The financial reality of Lucas's care became apparent quickly. The insurance coverage Owen had through the shop was basic at best, designed for routine maintenance rather than catastrophic injury. The specialized equipment Lucas needed, the ongoing therapy, the modifications required for their apartment, all of it added up to amounts that made Owen's head spin. He took out loans against the shop, sold his truck, and bought an older model, cut every expense he could think of, and still the bills mounted faster than he could pay them. It was during one of these desperate late-night sessions with his calculator and a pile of medical bills that Owen's phone rang. Michael Harrison's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, Owen considered letting it go to voicemail. They hadn't spoken since that terrible night in Michael's study, hadn't exchanged so much as a text message, despite living in the same small town where news traveled fast. "Owen." Michael's voice was careful, formal, stripped of the easy warmth that had characterized their friendship. "I heard about Lucas. I'm sorry. How is he doing?" The simple question opened a floodgate of emotion that Owen had been holding back for weeks. He found himself describing Lucas's injuries in clinical detail, the surgeries and setbacks, the insurance complications and financial pressures, all of it pouring out to the one person who might truly understand what they were facing. "Ben asks about Lucas every day," Michael said when Owen finally stopped talking. "He's been struggling since you two stopped coming around. The doctors say he's regressed, become withdrawn again. I think he blames himself for whatever happened between us." The guilt hit Owen like a physical blow, the realization that his pride had not only hurt Michael but had damaged Ben's fragile recovery. "It wasn't his fault," Owen said quietly. None of it was his fault. Michael was silent for a long moment, and Owen could hear the weight of unspoken words in that pause, all the things that had been said and couldn't be taken back, all the bridges that had been burned in the heat of wounded pride. "The foundation has programs for situations like this," Michael said finally. "Specialized equipment, therapy funding, home modifications. If you're interested, I could have someone reach out to you directly. No strings attached, no personal involvement from me." The offer hung between them, generous and painful in equal measure, Michael's way of helping without forcing Owen to swallow his pride completely. "Why would you do that?" Owen asked. "After everything I said, after how I treated you and Ben, why would you still want to help?" Michael's answer came without hesitation, his voice steady despite the emotion Owen could hear beneath the words. "Because Lucas is 8 years old, and none of this is his fault. Because I know what it's like to watch your child face impossible challenges and feel powerless to fix them. And because despite what you think, our friendship meant something to me. It still does." The simple honesty in Michael's voice broke something loose in Owen's chest, months of anger and pride crumbling in the face of genuine compassion. The Foundation's intervention came swiftly and professionally, just as Michael had promised. A caseworker contacted Owen within days, explaining the programs available and beginning the process of getting Lucas the specialized care he needed. The equipment arrived first, a state-of-the-art wheelchair designed for growing children, followed by approval for an intensive rehabilitation program at a facility that specialized in pediatric spinal injuries. But it was the smaller gestures that meant the most. A care package arrived at the hospital with Lucas's name on it, filled with books about famous inventors and engineers who had overcome physical challenges, along with a model kit for building a remote-controlled car that could be operated entirely by hand controls. There was no card, no identification of the sender, but Owen recognized Michael's thoughtfulness in every carefully chosen item. Lucas's face lit up when he opened the package, his first genuine smile since the accident. "Dad, look at this," he said, holding up a biography of Stephen Hawking. This guy was in a wheelchair too, and he figured out how black holes work. The wonder in his son's voice reminded Owen of the enthusiasm Lucas had shown in Michael's garage, the same curiosity and determination that no accident could truly diminish. The rehabilitation facility was unlike anything Owen had ever seen, a place where children who faced similar challenges to Lucas and Ben worked together to reclaim their independence. Owen watched his son navigate obstacle courses designed for wheelchairs, participate in adaptive sports programs, and slowly begin to see possibilities instead of limitations. The other children welcomed Lucas immediately, sharing tips and tricks with the easy camaraderie of people who understood each other's struggles. It was during one of these therapy sessions that Owen noticed a familiar figure in the observation area. Ben Harrison sat in his own wheelchair beside a woman who was obviously his caregiver, both of them watching the children work through their exercises. Ben looked older somehow, his face thinner than Owen remembered, his expression carrying the weight of months spent battling his own demons. Owen approached slowly, uncertain of his reception, prepared for Ben to turn away or ignore him completely. Instead, the boy's face brightened when he spotted Owen, a smile breaking across his features like sunrise after a long night. "Owen!" Ben called out, wheeling toward him with an eagerness that made Owen's chest tighten with guilt. "Hey there, Ben," Owen said, kneeling down to the boy's eye level the way he'd learned to do with Lucas. "How are you doing?" Ben's expression grew serious, his green eyes searching Owen's face with an intensity that reminded him sharply of Michael. "I'm okay," Ben said carefully. "Dad says Lucas got hurt like I did. Is he going to be okay too?" The question was asked with the gravity of someone who understood exactly what Lucas was facing, who knew the fear and uncertainty that came with a life-changing injury. Owen felt a fresh wave of shame at how he'd abandoned this boy, how his pride had cost Ben a friendship that had meant everything to his recovery. "He's going to be fine," Owen said, meaning it for the first time since the accident. "It's going to be hard, and it's going to take time, but he's going to be fine." Ben nodded solemnly, accepting Owen's words with the trust of a child who had learned that adults sometimes had to deliver difficult truths. "Can I meet him?" Ben asked. "I know lots of stuff about wheelchairs now. Maybe I could help him learn some tricks." The generosity in the offer, the willingness to reach out despite being abandoned, shattered the last of Owen's defensive walls. He looked across the therapy room to where Lucas was working with a physical therapist, struggling with an exercise that would have been simple before the accident. "I think he'd like that very much," Owen said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think he needs a friend who understands what he's going through." Ben's smile was radiant, the same joy Owen remembered from their Saturday afternoons in Michael's garage, proof that some connections were stronger than pride or misunderstanding. When Owen introduced the boys, something magical happened. Lucas's defensive posture melted away as Ben wheeled up beside him, immediately beginning to share tips about wheelchair navigation and adaptive techniques he'd learned in his own therapy. Within minutes, they were racing their chairs around the therapy room, their laughter echoing off the walls and drawing smiles from the staff and other parents. "He's been asking about you both for months," a familiar voice said behind Owen. He turned to find Michael standing in the doorway, his expression cautious but hopeful. "Every day he wanted to know when Lucas was coming back, when you were going to finish working on the Mustang. I didn't know how to explain that you weren't coming back." Owen met Michael's eyes, seeing the hurt there alongside the hope, the damage that his words had inflicted on a man who had only wanted to help. "I was wrong," Owen said simply. "About everything. I was scared and proud and stupid, and I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I hurt Ben, and I hurt you, and I'm sorry." Michael's expression softened, relief replacing the careful guardedness he'd maintained. "We all make mistakes when we're scared," he said quietly. "The important thing is what we do to fix them." He nodded toward where Ben and Lucas were now working together on a challenging transfer exercise, Ben patiently demonstrating the technique while Lucas concentrated on following his instructions. "I don't know how to repay what the foundation did for Lucas," Owen admitted. "The equipment, the therapy, all of it. I know it came from you, even if the paperwork doesn't say so." Michael shook his head, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "The foundation helps lots of families," he said diplomatically. "But if you really want to do something, there is one thing Ben keeps asking for." Owen raised an eyebrow, curious about what the boy might want that his father couldn't provide. "He wants to know if you'll come finish working on the Mustang with him. He's got some ideas about modifications that might make it easier for him to help with the maintenance." Michael's voice carried a note of pride mixed with hope. "Apparently, he's been researching adaptive tools and accessibility modifications. He wants to show you what he's learned." Owen looked at the two boys, now deep in conversation about something that had them both animated and excited. Their wheelchairs positioned so close together, they might as well have been sharing secrets. The sight of his son smiling, truly smiling, for the first time since the accident made the decision easy. "I'd be honored to work on that car with him," Owen said, meaning every word. "With both of them. I think they could teach me a thing or two about not giving up." Michael's smile was answer enough, a bridge rebuilt with simple words and shared purpose. As they watched their sons discover friendship in the midst of challenge, Owen realized that sometimes the most profound healing happened not when problems were solved, but when people chose to face them together. The road ahead would still be difficult, but they wouldn't have to walk it alone. 6 months later, Owen stood in Michael's garage watching something he'd never thought possible. Lucas and Ben worked side by side under the hood of the restored Mustang, their wheelchairs positioned at perfect angles to give them access to the engine compartment. Ben was explaining the intricacies of fuel injection systems while Lucas pointed out potential improvements to the cooling system, their conversation flowing with the easy expertise of seasoned mechanics. "Hand me that wrench," Ben called to Lucas, who passed it over without looking up from the alternator he was examining. The boys had developed their own rhythm, their own language of mechanical understanding that transcended their physical limitations. Owen exchanged a glance with Michael, both fathers marveling at how their sons had not only adapted, but thrived together. The real breakthrough had come 3 weeks earlier, during one of their regular Saturday sessions. Ben had been struggling with a particularly stubborn bolt, his face flushed with frustration as his limited upper body strength worked against him. Owen had started to move forward to help, but something in the boy's expression stopped him. Instead, Owen knelt down beside Ben's wheelchair and looked him straight in the eyes. "You know what, Ben?" Owen had said quietly. "Watching you work on this engine, figuring out solutions that I never would have thought of, adapting every tool and technique to make it work for you, I've got to tell you something." Ben had looked up, curious about the serious tone in Owen's voice. "You're stronger than me," Owen continued, his words carrying absolute conviction. "Not physically, but in every way that really matters. You've faced challenges that would break most adults, and you've done it with more courage and determination than I've ever shown in my entire life." For a moment, Ben had just stared at him, processing the words. Then something extraordinary happened. A smile spread across the boy's face, not the polite smile of a well-mannered child or the grateful expression he'd worn during their earlier interactions, but a genuine, radiant smile of pure joy. It was the first time Ben had truly smiled since his accident, and everyone in the garage had felt the power of that moment. Michael had tears streaming down his face as he watched his son's transformation, seeing the boy he remembered from before the diving accident finally returning. Lucas had whooped with delight, not fully understanding the significance but catching the infectious joy of his friend's breakthrough. Owen had felt something shift inside his own chest, a understanding that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest gift you could give someone was simply believing in them. Now, watching the boys work together with such natural partnership, Owen realized they had all learned something profound about resilience and friendship. The Mustang purring beneath their hands was more than just a restored car. It was a testament to what could be accomplished when people refused to give up on each other. "Dad, come look at this," Lucas called out, his voice bright with excitement. "Ben figured out how to modify the gear shifter so either of us can use it easily. It's brilliant." Owen moved closer to admire their handiwork, noting the clever adaptations they'd designed to make the classic car accessible for wheelchair users. Michael joined them, his pride evident as he examined his son's engineering innovations. "Maybe we should patent some of these modifications," he suggested. "Other people could benefit from these ideas." Ben's face lit up at the possibility of helping others who faced similar challenges. "We could start a company," Ben said eagerly. "Harrison Walsh Adaptive Technologies. We'd specialize in making cool things accessible for everyone." Lucas nodded enthusiastically, already imagining the possibilities. Owen and Michael looked at each other, both thinking the same thing about their sons: natural business instincts and generous hearts. As the afternoon sun slanted through the garage windows, casting golden light on their small group, Owen reflected on how much had changed. The boy who had once retreated from the world was now making plans to help change it for the better. The friendship between their families had been tested and emerged stronger, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine caring. "You know what?" Owen said, putting his hands on both boys' shoulders as they admired their completed work. "I think this is just the beginning of something amazing." Ben's smile, now as natural as breathing, confirmed what they all knew to be true. Sometimes the most beautiful things really do grow from broken places. And sometimes the strongest people are the ones who've learned to smile through the toughest challenges. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.